Hello and welcome to CryptoCurrents. I'm your host, Monika Proffitt, and I'm here with Jeroen Develterelter, who is the COO of Persistence One. We're here to talk about Bitcoin ecosystems, sidechains, and the whole wonderful uptick that we've seen on this legacy blockchain. So thank you so much, Jeroen, for joining us.
That's my pleasure to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
This is going to be really fun because Persistence One is really doing some cool stuff that I actually have a little experience in. I think there's a handful, select companies that have done well in Bitcoin and they've seen the potential and they want to address scalability and speed and even with L2's cross-chain interoperability. And it sounds like you guys are really in the depths of that. So I'm excited for this conversation. Um, Thank you. And
Likewise, super excited. Let's do this.
yeah, absolutely. It sounds like you are more of a veteran than most people that I talk to in Bitcoin itself. And even though you were just sort of stumbling, can you tell me a little bit about your experience with Bitcoin way back in the yesteryear cover wagon days of 2010?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I don't talk about it much because in a way, like I feel it's so irrelevant because I had no clue what I was doing back then.
Nobody did. Don't worry, nobody did.
Um, and I remember like back then, like I had my own computer at home, played some computer games, but also like discovered this thing, Bitcoin, and like started to do some like simple Bitcoin mining at home. Back in the days, it was still possible on a normal computer. Um, Down on like the very first initial wallets, and so I really can't remember much. And then kind of just dropped it. Like I don't know if I even ever successfully mined a Bitcoin or not. Like probably not. Um, but I knew I looked at it, and then I left it until 2017, I think, something like that. And then kind of looked back at it and kind of started putting a little bit of money into it and kind of start trading and like I think just a pretty traditional kind of trading, kind of investing mindset, but more long term. And then eventually held on to everything during the bull, but also during the bigger crashes, and ended up with maybe the same amount as like what I started with. So not very great in terms of success rate there, but at least it was cool to kind of be back in the game and looking at crypto from a bit closer. And ever since then, kind of started to follow a little bit more actively until in 2021 kind of started reconnected with someone I worked with before who was like very active in the space and kind of discovered that there's actually a lot of interesting stuff happening, and I wanted to be a part of that, and yeah, really dive in deeper, like but more as a builder this time rather than as a trader.
So more as a builder, what, 11 years later, 2021, you were like, okay, I'm ready to make the leap and get involved.
Correct, correct. Because in a way, like I've always been a product guy. I like to build products, build software, like tech, and I felt like this is kind of a good combination because it combines in a way finance with tech, and in a way that's what I've been doing in the past as well. Started as a consultant in traditional finance, and often did like software development, like coordination for bigger banks, and kind of felt like it was right up my alley. So yeah.
You know, we have a lot of listeners who are on the younger side, and a lot of times they're just getting started in their careers or they're getting just started in crypto, which is really interesting. So I thought it was cool that you actually have a pretty unique background in terms of your bachelor's. You got your degree in a weird hybrid that we don't really see in the States too often, but it's more common in Belgium. It's like you're not just an engineer and computer science person, but also sort of a finance person at the same time. What was that again?
Correct. It's called business engineering. I'm really not sure if it's a familiar like degree in other like countries, but it's a 5 year degree, like university degree. It's bachelor's first and master's, and it really combines engineering with business. So it's quite technical in nature. There's a lot of like maths and economic and actual engineering involved, and then it kind of combines that with business and finance and accounting and like all the more traditional finance kind of courses. Um, yeah, which is kind of very generic. It's like a generalist type of kind of play. If you don't really know as a student what to go for, this was like a
Oh
good
yeah.
choice, I think. And because you can end up like everywhere and anywhere, which is quite cool. And it's also what I did in a way. Like ended up in like different companies, different locations. Like lived in Paris for a bit, lived in Singapore for a bit. So quite variable. So quite nice.
Yeah, yeah. I hear most people that I interview or people that have been veterans in this space or builders in this space, they came up one of two ways. You kind of came up both, which is interesting. You know, it's either on the finance side or it's on the tech side for fintech, but you're like actually, your generalism, I think, served you well in this one because technology caught up to what you were already perfectly positioned for. So that's very cool.
Correct,
Um,
correct.
It sounds a lot like what Persistence One. Now, forgive me if I get this wrong, but it sounds like Persistence One is really dealing with a lot of the issues of the day in crypto, which is, it starts with interoperability and it ends with user experience. But can you tell me a little bit about the Bitcoin L2, the layer 2 ecosystem that you've seen fragmentation and what you guys are doing to address it, fix it, specifically in the Bitcoin network?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, so for those who are not super familiar, like with what a layer two is, it's kind of a network that is built on top of a network, typically a layer one, which is used to kind of settle transactions and kind of inscribe the data into that original layer one. Like typical layer one is Bitcoin is the biggest layer one, Ethereum is kind of the second biggest. Then you have a whole bunch of others. Now, traditionally on Bitcoin, there has not been many layer twos. It's always like Bitcoin has never really pushed programmability like very high on their agenda. It was more about other things like security, like really decentralization, a lot of adoption when it comes to users and like holders of Bitcoin. But now in more recent days, like ever since the Taproot upgrade actually on the Bitcoin network, programmability kind of came more and more into the picture, and like a lot of projects started to actually build on top of Bitcoin, either directly or try to kind of use some components of the Bitcoin ecosystem to kind of create side chains. And that's what we've seen more recently. So on Ethereum, we already have a whole bunch of like layer twos, like the Optimism, Arbitrum, those types of networks. Now on Bitcoin, those start to kind of pop up. Which is it's pretty cool to see, because in a way we're finally bringing like activity, or the goal is to bring activity to the biggest blockchain there is in the world, or like the biggest asset as well in terms of digital assets. But now the problem with that is like there's so many different ecosystems or different like teams trying to build ecosystems of DeFi, mostly DeFi. There's other things as well, there's gaming and stuff, but mostly DeFi ecosystems on top of Bitcoin. But they're all kind of individual ecosystems, right? And it's kind of hard in a way to navigate from one to another. And like it's all great, I think, in general for the adoption of Bitcoin and Bitcoin DeFi, also called like BTC5 in short. But the problem I see with that, like if everyone is kind of going to do their own thing and everyone's going to try and fight for adoption there, we're kind of losing the bigger picture of like bringing Bitcoin or bringing DeFi to Bitcoin. And that's where we come in, and like where we really want to build something that makes everyone's kind of community or ecosystem kind of connected with each other and make it very easy to go from one to another. And the main reason for that is if you see like I mean, especially if you look at DeFi on Ethereum, what people mostly did to really like what helped the growth of Ethereum of the DeFi on Ethereum was that people would go and chase yields in a way, or they would chase opportunities on various chains. And that's typically how people behave within crypto. Now, on these different layer twos, these ecosystems, there will be so many interesting projects that build interesting things and like have interesting opportunities. But if it's very hard for users to move around from one to another, it's going to be hard for users to really like dive into that ecosystem and be happy about it. Because if every time they have to kind of go back to the original layer one and then kind of move things around, it will be tricky. So in very short, what we do is like we make cross-chain swaps across Bitcoin. A layer two is very simple. So make it very easy to go from one asset to another across these Bitcoin layer twos.
So tell me if I'm getting this wrong, but it sounds to me like you're sort of making an Uniswap for Bitcoin that's Bitcoin native. Is that kind of what we're talking about?
I wouldn't call it Uniswap. Like Uniswap, it's like a DEX, so it's a decentralized exchange which does typically trade tokens, but typically they stay within the same blockchain. They actually are developing a project that does cross-chain swaps as well. But I would rather compare it almost to a bridge. Like think of it as a bridge. You have assets on Bitcoin chain A, or Bitcoin, let's say Bitcoin sidechain A. You want your assets to go to Bitcoin sidechain B, and you want to bring them there. Like think of it that way, and we help to facilitate that. But we do it in a way without bridging. It's not magic, but like we call it a bridge without bridging. It's an intent-based architecture. Happy to talk more about that if you're interested in that.
Goes right into my next question about the intent-based architecture. When I heard that, I thought, Intense-based is usually a term I hear in AI, something that's like, we will know what you want to do before you know what you want to do. Ha ha ha.
Mm.
Like, we are great at this. We have trained ourselves to become you. I'm like, oh, that's kind of creepy. But intense-based technology is seeming like somebody in my bathroom mirror. So what is your version of this?
Well, I'll have to disappoint you. It's not AI, if that was what you're
No,
looking
I'm not
for.
disappointed. I'm
Uh,
a little relieved, actually.
Okay, good, good. So how to explain intent-based architecture? Like trying to explain it very simple, right? Now, typically in current DeFi, like you have to explain to the protocol or to the app you're interacting with, you have to explain exactly what you want to do and how you want to get there. I'll actually try and simplify this with an example like outside of crypto. I think makes it even easier. Imagine you're ordering something on Uber Eats or on Deliveroo, right? You have to choose the restaurant that you're choosing from, the dish that you're choosing from. You have to give your address and you have to say, okay, I think it's okay if it's here in, let's say, 25 or 30 minutes, right? And those are like your intents. Like that's what you want, right? Now, whether this guy or the girl, for this matter, like picks up your food with a motorcycle or with a car, and whether he takes the highway or the other way, in a way for you it doesn't matter, right? The actual route, you're not specifying that as a user. Now, for you, what matters is the food arrives within those 25 minutes that you've given, and it's the right food, and ideally it's still hot, right? So the same thing is actually in crypto when it's about like bridging transactions or like cross-chain swaps. You don't really care how the transaction happens. What you give us as a protocol as an input is, I want to swap my one Bitcoin, let's call it Stacks BTC on the Stacks chain, and I want to exchange that for, let's say, one Merlin BTC on the Merlin chain. That's exactly what I want. How it goes, I don't care, right? Just give me my one Merlin BTC on Merlin, and that's it. Everything else gets abstracted away, and that's for the protocol and the solvers, what we call in this case intent solvers, to kind of figure out, so that the user is completely abstracted away from any complexity.
Okay, so when you talk about when you said Merlin, that's like a side chain, correct? I mean, Stacks is a side chain to the Bitcoin network.
Correct.
When
Bitcoin,
I
yeah,
think
Bitcoin
about side
Layer.
chains, the way that I usually describe them, and now I get to ask you, the expert, to make sure I'm describing this properly. I think about
Hmm.
it like, if you've ever seen those really big mariner ropes that are just giant, they're like a bunch of things all twisted together. You can pull a boat with them, and they're just like these big maritime ropes or whatever. And they
Hmm.
all are twisted together, and they all work as one, basically one visual of a chain. But if you were to like look at the whole rope, it's like that's the entire Bitcoin network. That takes a lot of time to get the whole thing to wrap around and twist and work. But if you were to take one of the threads and just like loop it off to the side, it can actually do its own consensus and then it can kind of batch in that sense, in the way that it like reconvenes with the Bitcoin network. Is that an appropriate way to like give a metaphor for this? Like it's kind of a thread off the side of a larger rope.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, maybe. I haven't really thought of it that way. I've never really thought of like trying to explain it with maritime kind of terms.
I
Not,
just thought about the ropes and how they twist together, and then having things like kind of, when you look at a whole big rope, you look at all those things, and when you see the little bitty threads, there's still like three of them wrapped around each other that they still
yeah,
kind of
yeah.
combine and combine and combine. And I'm like, well, maybe that's sort of like a side chain. Is that
That,
true? Is it the same thing? It like kind of just jumps off on its own, has a small sub-consensus mechanism, and then rebatches? Or does it like literally connect to the Bitcoin network without, I mean, how does it get past the scalability and the speed factor of the slowness of the main Bitcoin network?
yeah. So, I mean, as far as the analogy go, I mean, I think it's a decent analogy. Like, I would have to think of a better example. I don't know. So I think yours is good for now, for sure.
All right, I'll keep
Um,
using it. Unless you tell me
um,
something better, email me and let me know if you come up with a better one.
keep using it. But so how I would like explain it technically, it's almost like these side chains or layer twos. Typically, so it's a completely separate consensus mechanism. They have all their transactions, and eventually they batch these transactions. And typically, they want to settle those transactions, kind of inscribe those transactions or approve that these transactions have happened onto the Bitcoin network, so that the Bitcoin network can actually verify or be used as like a verifier of that transaction. It's kind of, yeah, it's batching transactions in a way, and there's different ways of doing that. Like you have certain chains who use like a ZK type of mechanism, which is
Yep.
like zero knowledge proofs. You have other chains that use different mechanisms. Like you have chains that use some sort of a proof of stake consensus to kind of use a decentralized set of validator nodes to kind of reach consensus and then kind of sell it back on the Bitcoin network. There's all sorts of forms of like side chains, and there's a bit of a discussion even like what is it, an actual technical side chain, what's a layer 2, and all of this kind of goes back to how closely is it actually inheriting the security of the Bitcoin mainnet, right? Because Bitcoin, and that's what most of this is about, it's about inheriting the economic security of the biggest asset, like digital asset in the world, which is Bitcoin. And some side chains kind of take a shortcut approach to that, where they might leverage parts of it, and like some of the things will obviously be secured by Bitcoin or like the Bitcoin network. Maybe they might be like merge mine, for example, like where you have the miners that are already mining blocks for Bitcoin. They're also now mining blocks for these other chains. Some other chains are like only using half of it and have their own token, their own validator set, and just they say they're a Bitcoin layer 2. But there's a wide spectrum of like what is a layer 2, what is a side chain, and it's not super clear. But for us, at least how we look at it, is whatever it is, they will want to be connected to the others. So that's how we look at it.
That's a great way of putting it. Yes, you're right. I mean, every driver wants to, if they're in the food delivery business, they want to be connected through an app that gets them there, right, and gets them to the users. And anybody who wants to order in, they want to get on that app to find it. Who cares what the driver is, right? So
Correct.
it makes
I mean,
sense.
of course, there are certain things like, I mean, there's always security assumptions, right? Obviously, we don't want any of our users to face any like hacks because the side chain was not secure, for example. So
Yeah.
obviously there are certain assumptions, but yeah, other than that, like we kind of treat everyone equally.
That's very nice of you. We need more of that. We need more like flat ecosystem and kind of agnosticism in that. But you say there's a lot of interesting projects. It sounds like you guys. It doesn't matter what project it is. You just want to be able to get it interacting with the others. What is the most interesting project that you have come across in the BTC-Fi space so far?
Good question. I think it's hard to pick one. I think there's a few very interesting ones. I mean, I like a few. Like, I like what Botanics is doing, for example, with Spider Chain. I like what Enduro is doing with their different like side chains. I like what Babylon is doing. Slightly different. It's not really a Bitcoin layer 2, but Babylon they're actually bringing proof of work or way security from Bitcoin to secure other chains. It's kind of like an eigenlayer for Bitcoin, which I like. I think there's a whole bunch of like yield projects that are coming up as well that are like offering yield on Bitcoin, which I think is super interesting to watch. So yeah, many interesting projects for sure.
Well, that's why I asked you, because I did see, that it's pretty evident that the number of projects doesn't matter in terms of its infrastructure. It's really just the quality and the actual impact that they're having. And this is a very nerdy conversation. I give it full credit to being very nerdy, but at the same time, when you, like I said, you start sort of with sidechain stuff and you end up in UX, and so the user experience is really where we're trying to land. And you guys just trying to solve for all of these, trying to abstract away some of the minutia that the average user does not need to know about. Just get the job done, get the swap not done, make the chain work the way it's supposed to work, and work well in the playground with others.
Yeah.
But the quality and impact of the projects that you're seeing, you said there was even video games, which I'm very curious about. How are you seeing video games as a project? For an average user, someone listening to this podcast that's not deep into sidechain analysis, what their experience one day, not too far from now, given the sort of strides that Persistence is making, what is something that you could see tangibly, other than like asset swapping, that are some of these interesting projects that you see in the Bitcoin kind of ecosystem network like that? Video games? How?
I mean, video games, I have to admit, I don't look at it too closely, but I would not be surprised if there's like a bunch of video games that want to kind of just settle a bunch of their transactions on a Bitcoin layer 2, just for the sake of it. I mean, I don't think a video game immediately needs that level of security and might maybe hurt them, but I think in terms of like user base, Bitcoin is still the biggest user base out there, right? So it might make sense in terms of like a go-to-market strategy for games to say, oh, we're a game built on top of Bitcoin, and like if you win, it's actually inscribed on the Bitcoin chain. I think things like that could be pretty cool. But to be honest, like I don't look too much at gaming.
Yeah.
I don't know why, but I kind of left that behind when I was younger. Maybe I
I
should
think
kind of
it's
get it
called
back.
maturity. I appreciate it very much.
Maybe. Um, but I mean, not sure. What was the rest of your question? I kind of
Oh,
forgot.
in terms of just this interoperability and resource utilization, you
Oh,
gave a great example of what just, an average user who's not going to be deep in the knowledge of
yeah,
what a sidechain ecosystem is, but what they might encounter as a user. And it sounds like, you're really
yeah,
getting there. You're able to say, listen, these things can be settled here, they can be swapped here, they can
sure.
interoperate these ways very seamlessly. I have to say, having been in crypto since 2016 or so, I really have only seen interoperability and user experience and used utility like this be talked about in the Ethereum ecosystem. So it's really interesting to see the best of that interoperability and that desire to make something very functional come to the Bitcoin network. It's very
Yeah.
cool what you guys are pushing forward.
And maybe, I mean, now that I mean you repeat it, actually, I do have like an example that's maybe a bit more like easy for people to grasp. But in a way, I do think like Bitcoin as an asset, like there will be more and more holders of Bitcoin in the world, like just going forward. Eventually, like we see it already, like some corporations want to hold it, more and more people want to hold it. And I don't think it's like unrealistic to think that a large part of the population will want to hold some form of Bitcoin at some point. Now, the thing is, Bitcoin itself, like on the Bitcoin L1, there's not much you can do with it rather than just hold it. And it's the same way, like if you look at your US dollars, for example, in your bank account, if they're just sitting there and just like being inflated away, it's kind of painful to watch if you don't have any yield on them, right? So
So true.
so if you look at like what I mean, how I see it is like in the future, right? Like where people hold some Bitcoin, they'll probably have on their phone like an app as well where you can just track how much Bitcoin you have. But most of that Bitcoin, I think, will be on certain layer twos where you have some yield opportunities. Like obviously there will be different ways to generate that yield, whether it's through staking or borrowing, lending. Even like I would even see it very normal where people can actually like lend out their Bitcoin and borrow against it, for example. And so this is where interoperability for us like plays a huge role in that type of user experience where let's say you already have a bunch of Bitcoin, let's say on again we can use the same two chains. Let's say you have Stacks BTC on Stacks, right? But you want to see like you want to deploy that Bitcoin into a borrowing lending platform on Merlin. Now you shouldn't want to or you shouldn't have to worry about now transferring that Stacks BTC to Merlin. Like we actually want to integrate with the borrowing lending platforms on that level where a user who has any form of BTC that he can just deploy into that protocol without having to think about it and without having to think, oh, this is actually I'm going to lose half of my worth here. I'm going to also have to wait for half an hour for these transactions to settle. It just needs to be so quick and so instant and like painless for a user, and that's what we're trying to kind of bring.
That's fantastic. I can't tell you how many times, even as someone who's done more than a handful of transactions on various networks and blockchains, that I've transferred something and been like, oh my God, where did it go? Where did it go? Where did it go? Where did it? I can't, I must have messed up. I'm going back through. No, I got everything's right. Where did it go? And then 11 minutes goes by, 11 painful minutes in which I'm like, why didn't I transfer a smaller amount? Why didn't I test it? Why was I thinking, oh my God, Monika, you're getting too confident. And then the voices can stop because it shows up. And it's like, this is way too stressful. Thank you for
Yeah.
taking away some of this stress because the number of times I have just thought I was a big idiot and I wasn't. I was not. But it just took a long time to get that
Everyone's been
confirmation.
there. Everyone's been
Oh my God.
there.
Oh my God. Thank you
Everyone,
for taking away some of the pain.
yeah,
I
we've all been
appreciate it.
there. It's very painful. Yeah, it's painful, and that's for us. Like we want transactions to be like within a second, and I think it's very
Yes.
reachable with the way we've designed it. So yeah,
Faster than my self doubt. Please make it faster than my own self doubt.
okay, that will be the new goal. Faster than
Thank you.
anyone's self-doubt.
Is there any new developments that you want to make sure we know about that's coming up? Any new launches, new features, things that we should keep an eye out for as users and as enthusiasts about crypto?
I mean, from our side, I think definitely. We actually we're yet to launch our testnet like we've been developing like for the last couple of weeks. and aim to go live on our testnet in September. So definitely keep a close eye out on that. We launched with a few chains, but the goal is to actually bring it to mainnet on those few chains already in Q4 this year. And then eventually we will be expanding to broader network of chains. Obviously, the goal will be initially to take the bigger chains, the ones where there's most activity, but eventually we don't want to discriminate and like also take the smaller ones into account and like make sure they are connected, give them the best chance to also kind of grow the liquidity on their chain. But yeah, I mean, lots of things to look forward to on our side, I think. But the actual like product launch will be still for this year, so that's quite exciting.
Oh, that's fantastic. We will definitely keep an eye out for that. The product launch is always the best part. If there's a way
Yes.
to get in early and watch things from the sidelines as they grow, this is wonderful to get a heads up. Well, thank
Mm.
you so much, Jeroen. It's been a wonderful conversation with you. I love learning about Persistence One, and I'm so excited for what you guys have coming up. I hope we get to do a part two, maybe a Q4. Once you guys have something out, we can do a little some product
Absolutely. We
launch
can we
talking.
can test whether we are faster than your self-doubt. We can
Oh, that would be wonderful. My self doubt's pretty fast, but hopefully you will outspeed it. That would be nice.
we can do a live test for sure.
That would be great. Well, thank you again so much, Jeroen. It's been a pleasure, and I look forward to our part two sometime in the future. For now, this is Monika Proffitt signing off on CryptoCurrents. We will catch you on the next episode. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you so much.